I'm John Atkinson. I'm the editor-in-chief of Stereophile magazine, and I'm sitting here in my listening room with Sandy Gross, who has brought the Triton Reference Loudspeakers to me today to set up. Sandy is the man who I first got to know when he was at Polk, and then Definitive Technology, and now GoldenEar Technology. And Sandy, you're not so much a speaker engineer as such, but a speaker creator, is that right?
I think that's an accurate description. You know, I conceive of the product in a fair amount of detail. I guess sort of the way an architect conceives of a house.
Right.
But I'm definitely not the person that does the specific engineering on the product.
Right.
You know, I do a napkin sketch and turn it over to engineering, and then they take my dreams and make them real.
Well, I was thinking when David Lander interviewed you a couple of years back for Stereophile, and you mentioned that at some point you gave up the audio industry to go to Hollywood. I suppose you actually are an auteur, right? As they say in cinema. You're somebody who creates a vision and then assembles a team to bring that vision into reality.
I think that's a really good description. You know, I have a terrific team. You know, our engineering team, headed up by Bob Johnston, is crackerjack, as they say, and they've done a tremendous job, really, of taking, again, my ideas and making them real.
Yeah. So, I mean, with the Triton Reference, which is, what, $8,500 a pair?
Yes.
Significantly more expensive than the Triton 1, your previous flagship, and yet at $8,500 a pair, it is very affordable, considering that you can spend six figures easily on speakers these days. So what were you trying to achieve with the Triton Reference that you hadn't with the smaller, earlier Tritons?
Well, we were trying to definitely come out with, you know, a step up from the Triton 1 that was better in every respect. Triton 1 is really terrific, but we felt we could make it even better in terms of the concept, so that's what we set out to do. You know, both in terms of the sonics as well as the, you know, industrial design and the cosmetic presentation of the product.
Right, but both have powered woofer sections.
Yes.
And then with a mid-range tweeter, mid-range array on top, right?
Yes.
And the ribbon and the tweeter itself is a folded ribbon type.
Yes, and you know, we feel, you know, Don Javogue, one of my business partners, and Bob Johnston and I have been designing and building speakers since 1995 with built-in powered subwoofers.
Right.
And, you know, the reason we did it, even though initially people thought it was to get the subwoofer box out of the room, was really to get much better blending with the rest of the speaker.
Right.
And we find it interesting. I find it very interesting now that we're seeing some very, very high-end manufacturers coming out with speakers with built-in powered subwoofers, even some that poo-pooed the concept up until the point that they decided to do it themselves.
Right, but I guess that it gives you total control over the tuning of the woofers, the alignment of the woofers, the crossover to the mid-range units. You have all that under control, whereas with a separate subwoofer, you're relying on the customer, the end user, to try to get that right.
It's almost impossible.
Well, I have to say I've never had success integrating subwoofers with speakers in my system, but of course I'm only a reviewer. I'm not as smart as regular people.
Well, that's it. I mean, we even have people, you know, when they look at our speaker and they say, "Oh, there's no phase control on the subwoofer," you know, I say, "Of course not. That's set exactly correctly in our engineering."
Right, and I believe at the engineering headquarters in Canada, you have access to a full anechoic chamber, right?
Yes, my team really feels very strongly, Bob feels very strongly, that you need an anechoic chamber in order to do proper measurements in the speaker development process.
Yes.
And we built one in order to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I wish the magazine had a anechoic chamber. I use quasi-anechoic techniques, in-room measurements, gated to eliminate the room as much as possible. The problem is that loses resolution in the mid-range where you most actually want that resolution.
Right.
So yeah, anechoic chamber is the way to go if you have the resources to devote to it.
Yeah, and the one that we have is really a duplicate of the one at the NRC in Ottawa.
Yes,
which a lot of people feel is the best there is.
Yes. Do your engineers use one microphone or a microphone array?
one microphone.
Yeah, because I last time I visited the NRC chamber, they were using an array of microphones in front of the speaker, so they didn't have to keep rotating the speaker and
we rotate the
microphone.
speaker, right?
The old-fashioned way
Right.
of doing it. Okay, so what matters to you as a speaker creator, Sandy? What are the most important aspects of sound reproduction?
Well, I think from my own personal perspective, when I got involved in audio and in high-end audio, what I was looking to do was to really sort of bring musicians into the room, or bring
Right.
me into the room that the musicians were in. I listen mainly to jazz, and you can do a really good job of that, with the system. From, again, my perspective, I think the imaging is the real key. I think the imaging is what makes it live, what makes it, sound
The
live.
feeling that there's a musician hanging in space between the loudspeakers.
Exactly. So, I'm looking for the speakers to disappear. That's what I've always sought to do in speakers that I was creating, was to get the speakers to disappear and to just have a three-dimensional sound field, both between the speakers,
Right.
to the left and right outside the speakers, and if it really works well, which we try, to have height as well.
Yeah. Now I noticed, when you were setting up the speakers earlier this morning, you were not only playing recordings which had a wealth of soundstage information, like this Enya recording you played, but you're also playing Dean Martin solo voice, Anna Karam on Chesky female voice. Is the mid-range very important to you?
Oh, the mid-range is critically important. If the mid-range isn't right, nothing is right.
Right.
So, we want to get that correct, and we also want the center imaging to be good.
Yes.
The center imaging, of course, you don't want it bigger than the speakers, but you want it life-size.
Right. You don't want it bloated and wide, but perhaps you don't also want it to be little pinpoints of sound across the soundstage.
No, because when you listen to live music, and it's very difficult to find live acoustic music, outside of the concert hall with classical music.
That doesn't have sound reinforcement somewhere.
Exactly, and so when you hear that, you don't hear a small pinpoint image. You hear blossoming of sound. I know here in New York we go to the Rubin Museum, and they do completely acoustic presentations, and it's fabulous.
Yeah, but as you say, rare outside of the classical music realm. One thing, looking at the Triton references here, and you're talking about creating imaging and sound staging where sources have a believable size. Is it coincidence that this is the width of a human head?
It's an interesting question that you ask. It's not a coincidence at all. And I'll just, mention, years ago, I was very friendly with John Dahlquist and Saul Morantz also.
Yes.
Saul was a mentor to me in terms of my development in the industry. And I remember John Dahlquist, who was a very great speaker designer, would say that the speakers should be the width of a human head, because when you hear, the most critical thing, of course, is the human voice.
Yes.
And when you hear the human voice, it's diffracting off something the width of the human head.
Yeah, the dispersion is identical to the dispersion of a real voice. So even when you're doing it in stereo, nevertheless, the dispersion pattern of the speakers reinforces the illusion of there's an actual singer between the speakers rather than a sound of some sort.
Right.
All the GoldenEar Triton speakers use a folded ribbon tweeter rather than a conventional dome. What are the advantages of that?
Well, when we started the project, we wanted to make something better than we'd ever made before. So I kind of focused on this folded ribbon. It's an evolution from the tweeter that Dr. Heil designed back in the 70s.
Yeah.
And, I felt very strongly that it had performance advantages. It's very, very fast. The biggest thing is it doesn't have a breakup in the very high frequencies.
Right.
The domes all have a breakup, which is a distortion that you can not only hear, but you can clearly measure. And it gives it, that sparkle that stands out but gets fatiguing after a while. And again, the folded ribbon, which, when they promoted the Heil originally, they used to squeeze cherry pits to show that squeezing the air works a lot better than pushing and pulling it. But there's no question that it does. What's moving the mass that's moving is the mass of each fold.
Yeah.
So it's very, very quick. And the high velocity folded ribbon that we use in the Triton Reference is not the same as the one we use in the other speakers. It's got the same diaphragm, but it has 50% more magnet material, more neodymium, which gives us a lot more control, makes
Right.
it faster but better controlled.
Higher sensitivity.
Yes, higher sensitivity too.
I remember when ESS introduced the first Heil air motion transformer speakers, is what, 75, 76? And after a couple of years, they disappeared. Why did people stop using them?
Well, I think ESS sort of faded away, and it was a patented technology,
Okay,
so you weren't able to use it. And what started to happen, I guess maybe 8 or 10 years ago, we started to see them popping up in some of the European speakers, some very expensive European speakers, which got my attention and made me very interested. A funny little story, when we started our project, I had a conversation with Bob Johnston, our head of engineering, and I told him that I really wanted to use this folded ribbon tweeter. And he kind of rolled his eyes and he said, well, we'll see what we can do with it. And at the end of the process, he came to me and he said, Sandy, I love this tweeter. This tweeter is really terrific. And it's very, very smooth and extended and very natural.
Yeah. It's one of the things, of course, you can't see it behind the grill of the speaker. In fact, the Tritons have this very interesting, unique curved profile at the front. Is that because you and your team did not want to make it look like, in the infamous phrase, a speaker that looked like a monkey coffin?
Well, we wanted something which was distinctive but was very simple and elegant.
Yeah.
And we worked really, really hard. We have an industrial designer that we work with, Miles, who is extremely, extremely talented. And he and I kind of go back and forth on the industrial design till we end up with something which we really like. There's a lot of subtleties to the industrial design that people don't realize. It's not just the basic shape, but every little radius on every edge, every little curve is key. And you don't see it in and of itself, but you clearly see it in the finished product.
Yeah. I mean, the speakers are created here in USA, engineered in Canada, but they're actually made in China. So that's correct, right?
Yes, the speakers are manufactured overseas because we find we can get, extremely high quality, just like Apple manufactures the goods in China. You can get any level of quality, but we work with suppliers who are very, very good, who can supply us with the quality level that we want. We design every component from the ground up, so we're not working with any parts off the shelf.
Right.
But by designing, for instance, our base mid-range drivers from the ground up, we choose the cone, we actually design the curve of the cone, we tool the surround, everything. We can get a very, very high quality base mid-range driver that's comparable with some of the European drivers that some of the manufacturers are paying maybe 10 times as much for, but that's part of the way we can produce a speaker which is so good and so affordable.
Right, and it's a drive unit that has exactly the physical properties that you need, that you've engineered into the complete design.
Absolutely, and we sweat over all the little details. On this particular product, the glue bond between the surround and the cone was one of the final things to get done because we wanted something which was strong but light.
Yeah.
And we went back and forth, must have gone back and forth a half a dozen times on the glue bond until we got it exactly where we wanted it.
Yeah. So, at $8,500 a pair, the Triton Reference is a lot less expensive than flagship models from other manufacturers. It seems to fit in a world where the middle class has, right now, more financial pressure than they ever had in the past. And some of us feel that the audio market is very vulnerable to this lack of disposable income. So as prices have gone up and up and up, here you come with a flagship which is, for want of a better word, affordable. Your thoughts on the state of the market, Sandy?
Well, the market is very complex at this point in time. I speak with a lot of consumers. I mean, many, many consumers. I love speaking with consumers and listeners, because it gives me a real world perspective as opposed to an ivory tower perspective of what's going on. And what I find is there are a large number of people that are looking for something approaching, state-of-the-art sound, but they have, smaller disposable incomes. For a lot of people, $8,500 a pair or $5,000 a pair for Triton 1 is not inexpensive. It's a major expense, a major commitment on their part, but they're looking for extreme sound quality. And so what I've always done in my career has been to focus on value. To go out there and to try to create the world's, quote, best loudspeaker is a difficult task. And I don't know what it is. What is the world's best loudspeaker? But in terms of trying to create the best sounding speaker at a price that's affordable, that's a different challenge, and that's something that's always appreciated.
Yeah.
So this is, what I've always set out to do, at our first company at Polk Audio and then Definitive Technology, and now even more so at GoldenEar. At GoldenEar, we're going beyond what we did before, in terms of price point and hopefully in terms of sound quality, to get to product that I feel really comfortable listening to on a daily basis myself, which I was never quite there, previously with our products. They were very good, but what we're doing now I feel much more excited about, and we're pleased.
Well, materials technology has developed quite a lot in the last 10 years, I think.
Yes, and our skill set. I mean, myself and Don Javogue and Bob Johnston, we've been building and designing speakers now for 30 or 40 years, so we've learned an awful lot. Hopefully we continue to learn more as we go along, in terms of the materials, in terms of the specific technology, and also in terms of the voicing of the product.
Right. Yeah, I mean, voicing of a product. I visited your apartment here in Manhattan, and you had a very interesting system, and it was all tube-based. So, are you a tube amplifier lover?
I love tube amplifiers. I mean, I've loved tube amplifiers since when I was in college. I used to go around on Sunday mornings, actually, early Sunday mornings. I get this Sun Classifieds, and people were getting rid of their tube amps and getting solid state amps. At that point in time, I was listening to a Dynaco SCA-80, which I thought, was good. And then one day I came across, it was a Citation 4 and 5. These were Harman Kardon tube amps. I brought them home, I set them up, I listened, I went, oh my God, there's more to it than solid state, and it kind of started from there. And I had old Mac tube amps, I had Marantz 8B, Marantz 9s. I guess I made a real move forward when I got a pair of Futtermans. Futtermans are OTL tube amps that were designed by Julius Futterman.
Yes, I remember him.
Yeah, whom I consider to have been sort of like Stradivarius. He was a genius. He just knew how to do it, sort of like an artist. And I remember he had a little, he called it a factory, but it was really a little office on the second floor on 72nd Street and Broadway. Going up there, giving him my $125 deposit for a pair of H3AAs and waiting 6 months to get them, and I got them, and boy, oh boy, did they sound great. And an interesting thing, I still have those amps, and they still work perfectly.
And the tubes still work?
Absolutely. People are always afraid of tubes wearing out, and I've had tubes fail, go microphonic or something, but in reality, I've never really had a tube that wore out, as far as I know.
It must be in a well-sorted design, they will last. But I remember an OTL amplifier we were testing 20 years ago, so it wasn't a Futterman's, and I was looking at it, and as I watched, all the tubes started glowing cherry red, and I dived for the power switch because I knew that if I didn't turn that amp off, catastrophe was going to happen.
Yeah, and the tubes hadn't failed. It was actually probably a resistor in the biasing circuit, I would imagine.
Well, and then a knock-on effect for all the other tubes, and so yeah. But so here we are today, and we've set up the Triton references with solid-state amplifiers. Thank you for for being forbearing on that, Sandy.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, we want to. We very much want to make products that are very flexible in terms of their use. The speakers are quite efficient. So, one thing, if you happen to like single-ended triode amps, which I happen to like, these speakers are all efficient enough to actually drive with those. And if you like solid-state amps, obviously, you can use a big, powerful amp.
As we were doing this morning.
And if it's a good amp, it's going to sound good. I mean, the speakers are revealing. It's not that they're difficult to drive, but you can hear what you feed to them, as we discovered today. And, the better what you feed, the better it's going to sound.
Yeah. What is the specified sensitivity?
It's about 93 dB, 1 meter, 1 watt. So
that's 6 dB above average.
Yes,
so.
Yeah, so that's important. It was part of what we were able to do with the new tweeter, with the extra magnetic material, and then we got the rest of the speaker to kind of come up to that. And having the speaker efficient, it's not compromised in terms of it being efficient. It's just we work really hard on every aspect of the design to bring the efficiency up, because that's always a benefit.
Well, because the higher the sensitivity, the less motion there is, the less motion there is, the less distortion there is for a given sound pressure level. So, but it's normally, to make very sensitive speakers, you're talking about horns and a lot of money that the designer has to put into it.
And there's often a lot of sonic compromise to those. I mean, I have heard some incredible horn systems, assembled out of separate Japanese components that I remember hearing one at the Washington Hi-Fi show years ago, but these were, big giant horns hanging from the ceiling and $100,000 plus putting it together.
Yeah, and again, not domestically acceptable, which brings us back to the form factor that you've been doing with GoldenEar.
Well, we try to get something which is very domestically, acceptable. Mm-hmm. People like them. We want something which has a stature, but again, which, is simple and elegant. Because simple and elegant, I like to compare it with a Brancusi sculpture. Very simple, very, very elegant, very beautiful.
Right. Well, I mean, having visited your apartment and seen your collection of art, you obviously know what you're talking about when it comes to design.
Well, a good eye, a good ear,
Yeah.
My father used to have a saying in our family, we know what good is.
Yes. Well, thank you, Sandy. It's been great hanging out with you and listening to music on the new speakers. And thank you, John.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
It's exciting.